Hey guys, Positive here, and welcome back to To WoT Blitz University. And so continuing on with our little university video series here, we're going to be focusing a little bit on map guides for a while. That's where I'm planning to take the series at the moment, especially maps that generally might be unpopular, unliked by a lot of people who might not know how to play them properly. So this first video is going to be focused primarily on Himmelsdorf. So unlike other map guides you might be seeing on YouTube, these To WoT Blitz University map guides are going to be more in line with my philosophy on how to play this game. So instead of just going over positions, I'm going to be talking more about the rotations that you should be making and how you should be reacting to different situations. And if you guys like this style of map guide, I'd love to know so I can keep making these. Feel free to leave your comments in the comments below, obviously. And without further ado, let's just get started with Himmelsdorf. Here is a map of Himmelsdorf. So Himmelsdorf is one of my favorite maps in the game because I think it's probably one of the, if not the most skill-dependent map in the game, because there is no singular dominant position that you need to control in order to win. Himmelsdorf, because of its urban nature, comes down a lot to the rotations you make, and all these little alleys and streets make perfect opportunities for crossfire, which is why I really love this map. And then I also think that its urban nature is also what caused people to really misunderstand this map and really dislike it, because a lot of the kind of traditional hull down cover just isn't there on Himmelsdorf. But anyway, for this video, I've kind of chunked Himmelsdorf into 8 different sections. So Zone 1 being the rails, as you can see. Zones 2 and 3 are these kind of urban streets. Zone 6 is the usual heavy alley. Zone 5 is the courtyard. Zone 4 is kind of this area by the rails, but not entirely on the rails, that borders the courtyard. And then Zones 7 and 8 are the spawns. So let's start by talking about Zone 1. So Zone 1 is the far side of the rails, as you can see here, and it's where the medium tanks spawn at the beginning of the match. So in general, even though medium tanks spawn on this area of the map, this is far from medium tank country. This is actually the town of Himmelsdorf. It's just in disguise. Even though it might not look like a town, it has pretty much all the same features of a town, like the bad kind of town that you would generally want to avoid. So all sorts of town-like features are here. Even though they're not actually buildings, these train cars function almost exactly like buildings. They're vertical cover, which means you can't actually hold down behind them. And also, it's just not quality cover. You can't shoot through them. You have to poke out or you have to side scrape. And you've got these long alley lines with just no hull down cover pretty much anywhere in this zone. This is one of the reasons why this is not the place to take your medium tanks. The only real piece of quote-unquote hull down cover you could find would be this little depression here, but even so, it's just one depression, and it doesn't really provide enough vision or map control to really be a worthwhile position. Another thing about the rails that I should note is, even if you're in a heavy tank, you really should not be coming over here, because Zone 1, this rails area, is the only part of the map where you can pretty much lose the game for your team nearly instantly. The reason for this being is that all these rail cars you see here, they prevent your team from supporting you anywhere else on the map. The only way that you can support someone on rails is by going to the rails. So that means if you and your teammates lose the fight here, you're just going to lose those tanks for free. So if you and like your buddy medium tank want to go 2 tanks out here and you run to 5 tanks, it's pretty much game over unless the rest of your team can somehow carry you out of this one. And it's one of the reasons why I really advise you not to go here. It's just a throw of the dice, unless you're just gambling that your team will overrun the enemy in a straight up fight, and that's not the sort of chance you want to be taking if you want to have a lasting impact on the fight. Now the next zones we're going to be talking about are Zones 2 and 3. So Zones 2 and 3 are these streets that are parallel to the spawn, as well as kind of like these little related alleyways. So the real significance of Zones 2 and 3 is that these are some of the best places to exert control over the courtyard, primarily because of the ramps on both sides. And these ramps are really great places to go, especially during the beginning of the game, because you don't really have to commit anywhere. And as you can see, they offer great views. So the primary purpose of these ramps, the other side also has an opposite ramp, but you can shoot across these kind of crossings here. This is really the primary purpose, is if there's anyone in the courtyard, you will tear them up from these streets, because you have this hull down cover from those little perches, those little lookouts. You can also peek around these corners. And so if you catch out anyone in the courtyard from zones 2 or 3, it's pretty much lights out for them. Now the next section of the map I'm just going to be giving an overview of is zones 4 and 5. So zone 5 is the courtyard itself, and then zone 4 is the street that runs parallel to the rails but just borders the courtyard. So in game, the significance of these zones is primarily kind of a flanking route. So from the courtyard and from the street next to the courtyard, you can actually shoot into the alleyway, especially through these brick areas, because right behind these brick areas is that hull down spots that heavy tanks like to use. So if there's no one in the zones we just talked about, zones 2 and 3, these parallel streets, then you can take zones 4 and 5, and you can either A, use them as a way to traverse the map quickly instead of having to go all the way around through the rails, or as kind of an area to harass the enemy from the side. So if your team has control of some spots on the alley, you can get some pretty serious crossfire and cause the enemy position on the alley to collapse. Courtyard is actually an excellent position, even though it's completely open, because tanks cannot really give their undivided attention to you unless they have control of zones 2 and 3. Courtyard can be a pretty dominant position, especially during the mid-game when other fights are going on across the map. So the next zone on the map that we'll be giving a quick overview of is zone 6, which would be Heavy Alley. Now in-game, Heavy Alley has 2 sides to it. That's important. And then, so in Heavy Alley is probably some of the best hull down cover in the game, as you might already know. So something to keep in mind about Heavy Alley is generally at the back you have these TD spots. So a lot of TDs like to camp on both sides of this map. It's fairly symmetrical, so it's right on the side of this building. They can shoot down these lanes and really punish you. And then, so aside from the TD positions, Heavy Alley is pretty much where I think the game is generally won or lost, because, like I said earlier, this does include some of the best hull down cover on the map. So traditionally, Heavy Alley fights revolve around this central area where I'm driving around right now. This is really the prize of Heavy Alley, because this spot allows you to focus on the enemy in front of you without having to worry about getting crossfired. So it's really crucial that if you go to Heavy Alley, you need to take this area here, because as I already highlighted earlier, these spots, these are nice, especially if you're trying to duel with the enemy. But if you get flanked and the enemy takes control of the courtyard, takes control of that street that I just highlighted earlier, I think that's zone 4, then you will be in trouble, which is why if the enemy starts to put pressure on you, you need to take the central area, because as you can see, this building here, this mound by the cap, this will cover you from their fire. And the last map I'm going to give a quick mention to is zones 7 and 8. These are the spawns. So obviously early game the spawns don't really matter. But later in the game, if teams go to opposite sides of the map, zones 7 and 8 can be pretty important for flanking. And something to note is that the spawns are completely open. There's no covers. So if you get caught out in the spawns, or if you can catch someone else out in the spawns trying to make a rotation, that's pretty much night-night for that guy. So moral of the story, don't get caught out in zones 7 and 8. But these zones can also be quite crucial if you need to make something happen. I'm not really going to show any in-game footage because they're pretty boring. Now, with this information in mind, you can start to kind of craft a game plan of how to approach Himmelsdorf depending on what the enemy does. So, at the beginning of the game, your rollout is going to be fairly similar, although it depends on what kind of tank you're driving. So, there's pretty much 2 initial spots I like to roll out to depending on what I'm driving. If I'm driving a heavy tank with armor, then I prefer to go to the Heavy Alley, as I mentioned earlier in the video. And you want to try and aggressively take this center area that I've highlighted so many times before. However, admittedly, this isn't always possible, so the mounds just behind it on the inside lane can be a pretty good spot to go to, especially at the beginning of the game. Now you want to go to the inside alley because, as I mentioned, TDs do like to hide out here and here. So if you play the outside lane, then that does leave you open to these TDs. Anyway, if you're driving a heavy tank, if you're driving something that's not a heavy tank, in that case, as I mentioned earlier, you want to avoid the rails area, because as I mentioned, if you get caught in the rails, you could potentially just die instantly and no one can help you. So what I like to do is I like to go to these streets, and especially these ramps here and here. Now regarding this south spawn ramp, there is one little sneaky spot that I like to use, and you can get some nice, pretty okay shots here. So it'll be showing in the video feed right now, but as you can see, it'll allow you to get some sneaky shots through that really sketchy angle through the building. But aside from that, what these ramps allow you to do is, as I already highlighted in the video, is you can shoot across into these different crossings, and also it allows you to punish anyone that goes into the center immediately. So that basically covers it for initial rollout. It's nothing really too simple, but Himmelsdorf, like I said, is won primarily by your rotations. So on Himmelsdorf, your first plan of action should probably be to deal with the guys on the rails first. Now this is important that you deal with these flankers first, because otherwise they could potentially harass your heavies in heavy alley. Now normally you should just allow them to push up pretty much as far as they want to, up until they reach one of these streets and also your spawn, because from here, as I mentioned earlier, you have hull down spots from which you can deal with the enemy. So depending on how the enemy approaches, you can either take a position in this street here or watching the spawn. So if you decide to defend from this street, then you can use that same ramp that you just rolled out to at the beginning. Just simply drive down, and then this allows you to watch this crossing here. So if they try to approach here, they'll pretty much be stopped by your hull down tank here. However, if you already have a tank watching this side, then what you can do is you can try and use the spawns and either A, wait for someone to try and flank through and then surprise them, or you can use the spawn yourself to flank the enemy. But overall, your goal is just lure these guys who came down the rail line into a trap, and after trapping them from your superior positions or from a flank attack, you should be able to destroy them pretty handily. So after clearing out the rail area, then you can go and you can use this line, or you can flank through the courtyard, and then you're finally able to safely take advantage of these shot lines that I highlighted earlier. So from this area, you can get some nice shots down through here, or you can use these crossings and you can shoot like this. You get all sorts of freedom once you've cleared out one of the flanks on Himmelsdorf. Of course, those previous set of rotations only cover if you're trying to defend against an enemy rail line push, but what if you're trying to defend against an enemy who's trying to aggressively push through the heavy alley? Well, in this case, there are two key positions that you need to hold on to. One is kind of this plaza over here where the TDs like to sit, and the other is, of course, this ramp that you rolled out to at the beginning. So if the enemy is pushing through here, you need to take whichever position is not currently being held by your team. Because as long as you hold these two positions, the enemy pretty much will have a very difficult time trying to push all the way through and actually making progress out of heavy alley. Because as you can see, from these two positions, you can create a pretty nasty crossfire for anyone who tries to peek into this area. Now, on the flip side, what if it's your team who's trying to make an aggressive push down heavy alley? Well, how do you deal with the most common enemy defensive spots? So, usually the first obstacle is going to be the guy who's playing this hull down. So as I mentioned earlier, this guy is vulnerable if you can get the flank on him. Oops, that's the wrong color. If you can get the flank on him through the courtyard. So you don't necessarily always have to go all the way out here. Sometimes just a short aggressive flank can be all that's needed to dislodge this guy, especially if you're in something like a TD or a clipper that can really do some serious damage. That might just a short flank, and hoping if the enemy doesn't notice, sometimes this is all that's needed to really get rid of this guy and get your team to make the aggressive play necessary to get rid of that guy. So once that guy's dealt with, then how do you deal with the enemy defense? Well, the next two positions you have to be worried about are this guy. There's oftentimes someone playing this corner, and usually someone playing around here. So in order to deal with such a defense, the first thing you need to do is you need to make this guy go away. So you can just continue to play your middle. You can play this middle position, and using this hull down area, your cover will be significantly better than whatever this guy's trying to do. If he's trying to just peek the corner, side scrape around it, doesn't matter. Your hull down position should be able to deal with him no problem. You can just HE him if he's side scraping, but usually that's enough to make him just go back and just stop peeking this area. Once this position has been dealt with, then you deal with this position. So this guy could be anywhere around here. He could be playing the TD spot back here. He could be playing here. Doesn't really matter. But all that matters is that he needs to go. This is unfortunately one of the harder positions to deal with because there is no hull down spots around here or on the flip side around here that you can really use. You'll pretty much just have to drive up to him, You'll have to trade away some hit points, it's unfortunate, but do what you need to do to make that guy go away. And then once he's dealt with, then dealing with this guy is simple, because your team should be able to pretty much push into this street. And so from here, it could be a pretty bloody brawl on this corner. However, in order to make it less bloody, all you have to do is, after you've dealt with this guy, just go around through the outside lane and then take this corner here. So there's a mound kind of right here that you can use. It's slightly hulled down, but using this mound and in conjunction with your teammates, you can get something of a crossfire on this guy, and you'll either force him to retreat backwards or you'll force him to retreat into this street. And in order to deal with these positions, it's really simple. All you do is from there, just continue to flank around through their spawn. And once again, in conjunction with your teammates who have pushed through, you should once again have a crossfire on him, pretty much no matter where he goes. It doesn't matter if he retreats into that cross street or if he continues to retreat back. You should be able to find a crossfire no matter what he does. And then from there, it's pretty simple of clearing out the rest of the street. Now, what you choose to do if you decide to aggressively push down heavy alley, or if you decide to defend against an enemy push that comes through the rail line, it's pretty much entirely up to your decision. So you'll have to look at both sides' lineups, and then use the information available to you on the battlefield to determine which side is weaker. You'll always want, on Himmelsdorf, you always want to deal with the weaker flank first. That way you can conserve as much of your HP as possible. So those two planes of action pretty much cover my standard rotations. So that's to cover if the enemy is aggressively pushing heavy alley, or if the enemy runs a split tactic. You just pick the weaker flank to deal with, and then you just take those two courses of action that I outlined earlier. And then the last scenario that I should really cover is if the enemy does the fairly common 7-tank rush down rails. So hopefully for you, if they do this, then hopefully you guys didn't have any tanks who are dumb enough to go onto rails. And this is what I'm talking about by rails can instantly lose you the game. Because if you have any tanks on rails and they do a 7-tank rush, you're going to lose like 2 tanks for free, and it's kind of unfortunate. However, all is not lost. So in case the enemy is doing the 7-tank rush, you can spot this out by if you see any enemy heavy tanks or TDs on the rails, it's almost more than definitely a 7-tank rush. You need to do what you can to clear the heavy alley first, or if your team spots something on heavy alley, then you'll need to try and push this aggressively. So if the enemy does this and you spot this out early, then you want to use one of these 3 positions to deal with it and just start the bleeding process. Because in order to properly deal with this, you need to just bleed them down as much as possible for every move they make. So from these 3 positions that I've highlighted here, like, your primary objective is to just shoot through these crossings. Generally, the enemy will have a couple tanks who are dumb enough and or lazy enough to drive through here, and then you can just shoot them all day long from across the courtyard. Now, after they cross through the courtyard, you just want to keep bleeding them. Then from there, you can use the tactics I outlined earlier in order to stop them from pushing through the spawn. And if they push through the spawn, you can just continue to fall back and play the heavy alley. But really, the objective here is to just continue bleeding them, or your other alternative is to try and go quickly and try and catch out any slower tanks you got left behind at the end of the tail. But this is pretty much the heart of Himmelsdorf. Really, if there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's that Himmelsdorf is essentially a square, so it's ring around the rosy around the courtyard. So just bleed the enemy for every move they make, or try and make an aggressive play and catch out a weak flank, and just continue to play around the courtyard, and then use the streets to create crossfires, as I've mentioned before. And so that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you play Himmelsdorf. And if you like this guide, please let me know in the comments. This is kind of a new style video for me. I'm experimenting with a couple of editing techniques. I think if it's distracting for you, having kind of like the video clips playing in the background. If you have any feedback in general, just let me know in the comments below. And if you like this series, also let me know so that I can continue making this kind of video for other such maps. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.